Hello and welcome to Stand Up Daily. This is episode 311 of Stand Up, and I've got two excellent guests joining me today. First, Stand Up's very own political analyst, chief Washington correspondent, Bill B. in D.C. joins me. And then a fascinating conversation with author, writer, historian Michael Pembroke. Talk about his new book, America in Retreat. The decline of U.S. leadership from World War II to COVID-19. I am Pete Dominick. It is time to stand up with me right now. Stand up. Hello and welcome to Stand Up with Pete Dominick Daily. I am here each and every weekday with the news recap from the day before and usually two guest interviews talking about the most important issues that affect you, your family, your community, your country, and your planet. We learn from the experts each and every day here on Stand Up Daily, fighting apathy, getting engaged, sharing ideas, experiences, and building a wonderful community of amazing, curious, hilarious, thoughtful, generous folks. Thank you for all of those of you who subscribe to this podcast. I am Pete Dominick. I'm your host. This is my job. I work out of my shed just north of New York City in the backyard of my house, building a new program each and every day. I like to think of it as a learning experience, a classroom, and building a community of awesome people together who will hang out this and every Thursday night, virtually 8 p.m. Missed it last week, though, but I'm excited to get back on this week. Hopefully, I'll be bringing a special guest or two with me. That's this Thursday at 8 p.m. If you're a stand-up subscriber, sign up now to support the podcast and independent media at patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or just go to the show notes where you can sign up for a subscription there. Come on, put that stimulus cash, put that stimmy to the podcast. I couldn't think of anything that rhymed with stimmy. All right, I'm in a good mood, feeling good, and I'm still high from an altercation I had today at the deli, the local deli. I shared that experience at the end of my conversation with Bill B. in D.C. coming up. But basically, I'm at the deli, and a guy wasn't wearing a mask, and I usually don't say things about that to people. I got my mask on, and but some lady did. I supported her saying it, of course, and the guy snapped at her, and one thing led to another. It got pretty crazy, and I tell that story at the end of my conversation with Bill. So that's coming up. But first, it's time to look back at the last 24 hours in news and what's called here on Stand Up the last 24. Hit the sound effect, Keith. All right, yesterday, President Biden deployed FEMA to the U.S.-Mexico border to help shelter and transfer thousands of unaccompanied migrant teens and children. Also, guess what? The chief of staff of Joe Biden's name is Ron Klain. I tweeted about his interview with MSNBC's Mehdi Hassan, and he followed me, and we had a little DM conversation. Should I invite him on? What do you think? Pretty cool. FEMA will temporarily house up to 3,000 migrant teenage boys at Adele's Convention Center. The CDC's COVID-19 guidance during the Trump administration was apparently not grounded in science or, quote, primarily authored by the staff. CDC, by the way, now that it's got its act together under the Joe Biden, warned that the U.S. could see another surge in COVID-19 cases as states relax restrictions and Americans return to airports for spring break travel. The Justice Department arrested and charged two men with assaulting the Capitol police officer who died after being sprayed with a chemical by rioters storming the Capitol on January 6th. I talk about that with Bill B. in D.C. The U.S. has about 1,000 more troops in Afghanistan than it's disclosed, and also the White House is expected to propose a suite of federal tax increases on corporations and the wealthy. How about that? And actually, I think there's a lot of good things happening. The Senate confirmed the first Native American woman to be congresswoman to also be a cabinet secretary. They confirmed Deb Haaland as Interior Secretary, and I just think that's amazing. You may have heard me talk about my feelings, curiosity, passion, and sympathy for our native people in this country, indigenous Americans, Native Americans, Indians. And I grew up on the border of the Onondaga Reservation, was just up and drove through there this past weekend. I grew up playing lacrosse, which is a sport invented by the Iroquois Indians in upstate New York, where I grew up. And I've always been curious, and you may have heard my interview earlier this year with my old roommate from acting school, Merton Running Wolf, who's a Blackfoot Indian, talking a bit about what it's like to be him and media portrayals of Native Americans in American media and film. But I am just so moved and excited by Deb Haaland, because the most important and moving experience I've had was working with young tribal people in the federal government's programming to help create education, connections to nature, and caring about the environment. And I had an amazing experience several times and hope to do it again, working with the Fish and Wildlife Agency and these young Native kids who had such serious issues and so pervasive: addiction and suicide and depression and alcoholism and all types of abuse on reservations across the country. It's absolutely horrific what has been done to these people. To see Deb Haaland be elected to Congress and now be nominated by Joe Biden to be the first Indigenous woman, I'm just so excited that Congresswoman Deb Haaland is now Secretary Deb Haaland, Secretary of the Interior. Now, the first Indigenous person elected to Congress is also the first Indigenous person to lead the Department of the Interior, ushering in a new era of Indigenous authority over stolen land, tweets the Sunrise Movement. She now has the power to crack down on fossil fuel corporations and evict oil companies that drill on public lands and waters. And here's a 3-minute and 20-second video, the audio from it, of course. This is, after all, podcast from climatemandate.org, where you hear Deb Haaland in her own voice. It starts with her the night she won her election to Congress in New Mexico back in 2018. And in this video, you also hear the voices of some other young tribal women along with Deb Haaland. And it gave me chills.
I never imagined a world where I would be represented by someone who looks like me. Tonight, New Mexico, you are sending one of the very first Native American women to Congress. I'm the person that my grandparents dreamed of. I'm why they worked hard to preserve our culture and our traditions, and we all have a responsibility, right? Because it was hard back then just to survive. Both my grandparents were taken from their families and sent to Indian boarding school. When my grandmother went to boarding school in Santa Fe, they kept her away from her family for 5 years. She went on the train when she was 8 years old, and she returned when she was 13.
My grandpa said he would go weeks without a hug, and he would be disciplined for speaking his language. He would be disciplined for questioning any type of directions or authority.
The entire intention was to assimilate Indians. To get Indians off their reservations, nations, pueblos, so they could essentially take their land or to take away their status as federally recognized Indian tribes.
They tried to extinguish a population of people, take away our rights, take away our land, remove the heart of our culture.
We were so overtaken so quickly, and so much was stripped away from us. The rhetoric for so long was, save the man, kill the Indian.
I know it's not easy and it's tough, but I'm just so grateful that you're out there.
Thank you.
Native Americans are kind of talked about in the past tense. We were these people that existed a long time ago, and we don't exist anymore. Kids grow up hearing this rhetoric and feeling like their identity isn't valid.
If you grow up never seeing yourself in any body of any governmental entity, it's hard for you to imagine yourself in those roles.
Having someone like Deb in office in Congress speaks volumes about where the country is moving, but also it's a reaction.
As a mother, I want my daughter to grow up knowing she can achieve whatever she wants without barriers.
It's
a very powerful election, that I can vote for a Native woman, that I can vote for a purple woman.
You know, if we start recognizing that Indian tribes should be a part of every conversation that our country has, we can create a future for everybody.
Deb Holland, and that is a video from climatemandate.org, climatemandate.org. Next up here on The Last 24, I want to play for you a clip from my friend Dr. Jason Johnson. Hasn't been on the show in a while because he's now exclusive to Slate, hosting his own podcast. We'll see how long that lasts. I'll try to get him back on. But he's still a really good friend of mine who I talk to regularly, and I love his commentary no matter what. Of course, he's a professor at Morgan State University, a contributor on MSNBC, where he appeared yesterday on MSNBC with Ari Melber, and he looked at the politics of the COVID rescue bill, which I'll talk with Bill B. in D.C. about. But I thought this is a good about minute and a half rant from Dr. Jason Johnson. Mike Jones, by the way, is a rapper, in case you don't know. I had to look it up. I didn't know.
It's like Joe Biden is Mike Jones. Like nobody wanted him back then, but now that he's passed the stimulus bill, everybody wants their hands on the stimmy. Everybody wants to take credit for it. Everybody wants it in their community. It's so
back
bizarre.
Then they didn't want him. Now they all on him. Strong.
Now they all on him. Now they're all on him. I mean, it's amazing to me. And here's the thing. We saw the same thing with Obama, right? With the stimulus package. You saw people like Paul Ryan, oh, the stimulus package is a terrible idea. And then he's writing letters to get his hands on some of the cash. That is what we're seeing right now with Joe Biden. And here's the problem, though. I don't think this is going to hold up. I think as the stimulus money starts to the COVID relief money starts to creep into neighborhoods, the biggest thing, if some of this money can be put, and it can be, towards school repair, ventilation, getting people back into buildings, it will be very hard for a local Republican member of Congress or the Senate to take credit for people getting back into school this fall or next summer when they didn't vote for it. And that's why I think this is really going to blow up in their faces. People can see, this is what I've always said about spending money. Tax cuts, you may or may not feel it. It depends on what you own. Joe Biden may not put his names on this stimulus checks, right? But people know where the money came from. They're going to know where the new bridge came from. They're going to know that that school is open because it came from the money. It's something that people can touch and feel and has changed their lives. And it's very hard to take credit for something that you didn't lay your hands on to begin with.
Always excellent analysis from Dr. Jason Johnson on MSNBC, Last 24. And speaking of which, Last 24 on MSNBC, Joy Reid had the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. And good God, is this man handsome. I know people say it all the time, but as he gets older, he even gets better looking. She put the screws to him.
Okay, we are out of time. I have to go to a break, but I have to. This is a yes or no answer that you could give me. If in fact Dianne Feinstein were to retire, will you nominate an African-American woman to restore the seat that Kamala Harris is no longer in the United States Senate? And do you have a name in mind?
I have multiple names in mind. We have multiple names in mind, and the answer is yes.
Okay, Governor Gavin Newsom, thank you very much.
All right, she didn't turn the screws to him. I mean, there's been a lot of controversies regarding COVID and how he's handled that, so probably shouldn't have said that. But on the question about Senator Dianne Feinstein retiring, I thought that was interesting and worth sharing. I want to mention that Joe Biden is planning the first major tax hike in almost 30 years. A judge has ordered Arizona Republican Party to pay $18,000 in their failed presidential election lawsuits. The Biden administration is using the Dallas Convention Center to house 3,000 migrant children. And Eamon Bundy has been arrested in Idaho for not wearing a mask in court, making him a no-show for trial. I like that headline. Oh, one more. National Black Farmers Association calls for Lindsey Graham to apologize over his racist comments about black farmers. I don't know if you followed that one, but the National Black Farmers Association, none too happy with old Lynn's Lady G. I didn't say anything about black farmers. I said I have farmed with a young black man who I insisted do it shirtless, and I liked him. I don't know what they're talking about. Okay, sorry. Just a few rapid headlines there before I wrap up here with some audio on vaccines. All right, one of the big stories in the last 24 was that major European nations have suspended the use of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. A cascading number of European countries, writes the AP, including Germany, France, Italy, and Spain, suspended the use of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine Monday over reports of dangerous blood clots in some recipients, though the company and international regulators say there is no evidence the shot is to blame. Let's check in with the BBC, who hosted Professor Anthony Harnden, who is the deputy chair of the JCVI, whatever that is. He said there's no link between blood clots and AstraZeneca jab after the Netherlands suspended its rollout. Here he is on the BBC Breakfast Show. The BBC Breakfast Show?
Safety is absolutely paramount, Louise, and we've monitored this data very, very carefully, both on JCVI and the regulators. We've given 11 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine to date, and there's no demonstrable difference between the blood clots in those that have been vaccinated from those in the general population. We have to remember that there are 3,000 blood clots per month on average in the general population. And because we're immunising so many people, we are bound to see blood clots at the same time as the vaccination. That's not because they're due to the vaccination, that's because they occur naturally in the population.
What I tried to say, Louise, is that blood clots always occur because people clot, okay? All right, that was me. In case you were confused, that was me doing the British scientist guy. And speaking of vaccines, there's a new polling app that says the majority of Trump supporters and the vast majority of white male Trump supporters, which is a lot of them, don't want to get vaccinated. And Anthony Fauci was asked about that on the Sunday shows, and he was confused, saying, I don't know why they don't want to get vaccinated. And today, President Biden, was asked whether or not he thinks the former disgraced President Donald Trump should encourage his cult followers to get vaccinated. And here is Joe Biden's response.
Did President Trump help to promote the vaccine among skeptics, sir? Especially the Republicans who say that...
I'm hearing a lot of reports from serious reporters like you saying that. I discussed it with my team, and they say the thing that has more impact than anything Trump would say to the MAGA folks is what the local doctor, what the local preachers, what the local people in the community say. So I urge all local docs and ministers and priests to talk about why it's important to get that vaccine, and even after that, until everyone is in fact vaccinated, to wear this mask.
And then he threw the mask that he was wearing in his hand to the reporter and said, I'm talking to you. I want you to wear this mask, this one that was on my face. I'll sign it for you. Okay, none of that happened. Okay, finally here on the last 24, I wanted to just mention something about women serving in the military. Last week, Tucker Carlson, who is one of the biggest assholes I've ever met in my entire life. He's also Fox News' top-rated host. He replaced Bill O'Reilly. Who would have thought anyone would have been bigger than O'Reilly? Maybe he's not, arguably, but he certainly is huge in the ratings. He dominates over there at Fox News. And some people say he's become the new Donald Trump, leading the outrage generator on the populist right, Max Boot writes in the Washington Post. Every night, Tucker Carlson says something false and obscene. It's his business model. I think that's important to mention. He's doing this to get ratings. And last week, he focused on the U.S. military, and he showed a picture of a woman in a flight suit for pregnant, a picture of a flight suit for pregnant women, excuse me. And he said it's a mockery of the U.S. military, and went on, and it's ridiculous. He talks about masculinity, and this was not, the entire military, not the entire military, but a lot of people in the military revolted. There are 232,000 women serving on active duty, constituting 16.5% of the total force. And Max Boot says in the Washington Post, they routinely go into harm's way. Indeed, recruiting and retaining women is essential to maintaining the U.S. military's edge over China and other potential adversaries. And Tucker Carlson's sexist comments make that harder, given how many troops watch Fox News. And a lot of other people had a lot of things to say. One of the best tweets came from @Simpkins_JD, who tweets, I'll never forget the day in 2005 when Tucker Carlson took control of a firefight near Baghdad, directing his team's MK-19s toward the ambush before dismounting and killing 3 enemies at close range with his M4. Oh, wait, that was 23-year-old Silver Star recipient Sergeant Leanne Hester, celebrating a young woman who performed heroically, apparently, in a firefight in the Iraq War. Anyway, I decided to reach out to our own member of the stand-up community who she herself was a Marine who served in the United States military. She is also a Gold Star widow because her husband, Derek Wyatt, was killed in Afghanistan in 2010, the day before she gave birth to their son, Michael. Kate has become a friend of mine. She's also a stand-up with Pete Dominic community member who joined us a couple of hangouts ago. I reached out to Kate and I said, would you mind just recording something on your phone about what you think about these comments from Tucker Carlson? And she said, no problem. Here's the great Kate Wyatt.
Here's my 1-minute rant on Tucker Carlson's irrelevant yet harmful opinions on women and military service. 2 things Tucker Carlson knows nothing about before he interviewed fellow irrelevant commentator Congressman Jim Banks on anti-racism. I'd like to point out that it is incredibly important for the United States military to combat toxic masculinity, which is exactly what Tucker Carlson was saying is not the problem. As a female service member, I can tell Tucker Carlson that he is 100% wrong, because what the real enemy within our ranks is sexual assault and trauma and sexual harassment. It is mission critical that we combat toxic masculinity in our ranks in order to lower the record high numbers of female service members who are being abused, harassed, and even murdered while serving their country. Tucker will have you believe that it is because of ponytails and maternity uniforms, as if women in the military cannot do their job if pregnant or with a ponytail. On behalf of all female veterans who have endured sexual harassment, sexual trauma, stagnant grooming standards that had not changed since the early 70s, I would encourage Tucker Carlson to sit down, pipe down, and not comment on things he knows nothing about, because it is his particular brand of Fox News, white privileged, toxic masculinity that is causing the degradation of our military service members and our ability to effectively fight terrorism around the world.
Please reach out to Kate if you like that. Check her out at tigfc.com, tigfc.com, and on Twitter at A Widow's Journey, U.S. Marine Corps veteran, Gold Star widow, yoga instructor, small business owner. She's also a stand-up member, and let's call her our military correspondent, veterans correspondent, Kate Wyatt. All right, that is the last 24-hour news the way I see it. That's the best recap I can give you. The clock has struck 12 midnight. I gotta get to the news dump.
Rampaging bird of prey makes a great big thump. It's landed on your child in today's news dump.
What the hell? Oh, another great jingle from stand-up listener and subscriber Pete Coe. Pete in the Bay Area. Love it. Oh, more. He sent me a couple more. All right, rapid fire headlines, not COVID, not politics, therefore undercovered, yet still important, or at least interesting. It's the news dump. Let's start in Colorado, where that major storm closed the airport, but it has since reopened. Denver's airport reopened Monday after a powerful late winter snowstorm dumped over 3 feet of heavy, wet snow. Parts of Colorado and Wyoming shutting down roads, closing state legislatures in both states, and interfering with COVID-19 vaccinations, but giving kids and people who love snow a ton of fun. And U.S. airlines have seen a surge in flyers this past month as the COVID-19 vaccine rollout grows. The Transportation Security Administration, better known to you as the people in the blue, Uniforms TSA, they apparently screened 1.34 million people at airport checkpoints nationwide on Sunday and probably arrested none of them for transporting tons of marijuana across state lines. But it was the fourth consecutive day that more than 1 million people flew. The last time that happened was mid-March of last year. Go buy your plane tickets now, Bill B. and D-Cell tells me in our interview coming up. YouTube is going to broadcast a Major League Baseball package of games for a third season. The series of 21 telecasts starts Wednesday, April 7th. Baseball just around the corner. Many stadiums allowing full attendance. That scares me. We'll see what happens with that. Tragic news out of San Diego where 3 people are dead, 6 are hurt as cops are saying a driver lost control and veered onto the sidewalk in downtown San Diego. The driver, whom authorities identified only as a 71-year-old man, was heading through a tunnel underneath the community college campus when he drove his Volvo station wagon up on the sidewalk shortly after 9 a.m. Yikes. Hope he wasn't texting. See? Every day, every moment is a gift, so stay in that moment because you have no idea what tomorrow will bring. The Associated Press is reporting that stocks bounced back from a wobbly start Monday to notch a 5th straight gain as Wall Street continued to eye the bond market. The S&P 500 index rose 0.7% to a new high as technology and consumer discretionary shares gains were offset by falling banks and energy stocks. I have no idea what I just read. The Treasury yields pulled back from Friday's sharp increase. But I bet you I sounded like I was auditioning for CNBC because they don't know what the fuck they're talking about either. Pardon my language. I'm sorry for kids in the car. The Academy Award nominees are out, apparently, and for the first time, 2 women were nominated for Best Director. This year's show is going to be telecast on April 25th, and I'll just tell you what the Best Picture nominees are. The Father, Judas and the Black Messiah, Mank, Minari, Nomadland, Promising Young Woman, Sound of Metal, and The Trial of the Chicago 7. I haven't seen any of those movies. I don't even think I've heard much about any other than Judas and the Black Messiah and The Trial of the Chicago 7, but I'll try to watch them all. Look like good movies. All right, I don't care about the rest of the nominees for the news dump. And finally, on the news dump, the Vatican declared yesterday that the Catholic Church won't bless same-sex unions since God, quote, cannot bless sin. The Vatican's Orthodoxy Office, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, or as I call it, the anti-gay guys in room 205, issued a formal response to question about whether Catholic clergy have the authority to bless gay unions. The answer contained in a 2-page explanation published in 7 languages and approved by Pope Francis was, quote, negative. Around the world, Catholic priests were startled because so many of them are gay guys, is what I think. All right, that is your news dump for today. And now it's time to get to my first guest on today's show. Coming up, very excited to introduce Michael Pembroke to you. I really love his book, America in Retreat, and I hope that you will listen to that conversation coming up. But first, it's time to talk to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, Chief Washington correspondent and parking garage owner, my friend Bill Boyle, or as you know him on Twitter, at Bill B in DC. Always one of the best conversations I have. I love talking with him about politics. I think his analysis is interesting, original, and often he predicts exactly what is going to happen, and I always love talking to him. Here's our latest conversation, which is no exception. Bill B in D.C. right now. All right, Bill B in D.C. joining me now. Thank you very much. It's been too long since we talked on the record. How are you doing? How's business in Washington in the parking business?
Well, as always, Peter, I'm excited to be here, and the parking business is just rolling along. Just I mean, we talked cliche, and I can't believe I said that.
We talked a year ago, and because I have a lot of respect for your insights on things and knowledge on things, especially on business. I mean, we always talk about politics, but you've been a very successful businessman for quite a while now, running a whole bunch of parking garages. And when I talked to you last March, I'm sure you remember it, you really scared the shit out of me with what you were worried about with your business in terms of what it represented for the larger economy. And how surprised have you been over the last year in terms of the economy? How bad did it get, and where is it now?
It got really, really bad. And what happened in my business, at least for me, and not necessarily for all my competition, but my business almost went under in the first 90 to 120 days of COVID. And it almost went under not because our cash flow dried up. It's because people owed us money and couldn't pay us. And I mean, a lot of people owed us money and couldn't pay us. And we were at this juncture where a very 1929 depression situation could have occurred. Because if you couldn't pay your bills, then if I couldn't pay my bills, the people I owe money to don't give a shit that's not because someone isn't paying me. And so we would have had to potentially go into bankruptcy over that. The PPP loans got us through to where people, and a lot of other people through for that matter, to where the money started flowing again. So we're fine now. And I've recovered pretty well. But there was a good 90 to 120 days there where I was pretty sure that it was all going to end in tears. And we came close. We had a near miss from a proper 1929 style depression.
Wow.
Or maybe worse.
Yeah.
Maybe worse, actually.
Yeah, I remember your tone. I remember the seriousness. And I remember just hating some of those conversations because you're always really honest with your thoughts, certainly with me. So, all right. That's the economy. That's your business. Well, where would you say it's at now? Do you kind of, is the parking business kind of go in line, especially in a place like DC, with tourism and travel, hospitality, restaurants, entertainment? Or is it more kind of commerce, regular, ordinary business?
Well, so in DC, as in Manhattan, yeah, I mean, there's sort of a baseline of business. And then the tourism is the cherry on top of the cake, right? That's what really, that's what sends your grandkid to college. No, not at all. Downtown DC, people are still not going to their offices at all. And tourism is probably 5% of what it used to be. That's all going to change real soon, though. And, if you walked down 14th Street like I did on Saturday, every outdoor space was packed. I think at this point, 15 to 20% of the city is inoculated now. And it's going to really blow up fast here. There's so much pent up demand. We run our business well, so we got to a point of sustainability while it's bad, but we can already see it's going to be the roaring 20s here real soon. I would say by July. And then, we're going to make up for a lot of lost ground and very quickly over the summer.
What is pent up demand? What does it mean to you? Pent up
demand is to put it really simply, is all those people who got checks who then immediately paid down their credit card bill or they just put it in their bank account. Those people have been sitting at home saving money. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've saved more money during COVID just from my personal paycheck than ever before because there's nothing to spend it on. I can't take a trip. I can't, there's only so many boutique beers I can go find and drink in my backyard and buy my keg.
I think for a lot of people, and it's certainly true of us, we always took usually my wife likes vacations and it's the one place she spends money. Really, she's very conservative and I would say responsible would be the word. But she likes nice vacations at resorts, pretty nice resorts. But for us and for a lot of folks listening, I'm sure you save money in that you weren't spent. A lot of money goes to your kids' dance and sports classes extra, which is also always hilarious because thinking about us growing up, it was like $40 for the whole Little League season or something. And
I got like a stick. I got like a stick, a rock, and a piece of string. Yeah, and it was like go out there and.
Did you grow up in in Bedrock? Is that the name of the Flintstones town?
New Jersey. So close enough. Close enough.
Well, no, I mean kids' extracurricular stuff. Once they get to a certain age, even 7 or 8, they start going to dance and sports, and that's really expensive. And you weren't paying for that, and so you save a lot of money there. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I get out of this because I hated all those sports as a kid, and I basically just forced my kid to learn how to skateboard, and do that sort of stuff. So
awesome.
I have dodged this. I'm raising a nerd child.
Well, your expenses will be strictly in orthopedics.
Probably, yes, or orthodonture after he gets beaten up a lot.
But those aren't too bad. I mean, it's mostly upper body limbs, elbows, wrists. You'll be fine.
Right. All fixable. All fixable. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly cheaper than a hockey all-star.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. I mean, seriously. Yeah. No doubt about. I mean, the amount of money that people spend on it. It's that we spend on dance. Frankly, the girls aren't doing well. Julia's done. With dance, and my other and Ava only takes one class, so they're no longer like going at the rate they were.
Right.
What were we talking about in terms of saving money, pent up demand? I think so. Let me just.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So
let me.
People.
Yeah, you weren't finished. Go ahead.
It's just that people were unable to spend money on all of these sort of like entertainment style expenditures, and they're fucking bored, and they've been sitting at home, and they're lonely, and. I mean, just simple things like, one of my friends told me the other day, and this is a fairly like high-end Washington political type. She said, all I want to do is sit at a fucking bar and order 10 drinks and not have to worry about dying sitting there. Right? Like people want to get out of their house. Yeah. They want to get out. They want to see people. You're not going to, I mean, I got to tell you folks, buy that plane ticket now if you can. Because by the time July rolls around, that plane ticket's going to be 4 times as expensive.
Right. Good point. Great advice. And maybe book the hotel and so on as well. Great advice. Yep. Okay, so let's talk politics. Let's talk the latest. You always are an awesome analyst of all things politics. I'll put my friend Bill B. in D.C., who's a business owner, up against any of the pundits on the cable panels, and always with some unique perspective and flair of his own. We often get into history. I always love talking to you. So first of all, let's just do a couple of questions that are getting a lot of attention, or issues that are. The Biden administration is being criticized by the White House correspondents, dinner types, and obviously the right, as maybe they should be, for not having Joe Biden give a presidential press conference where he stands there somewhere and takes questions for an hour or so, traditional for a president after a few weeks or the first month or so on. What do you make of that criticism?
I understand it, but I think that it reflects something that people misunderstood about the Trump era and what was going to happen after that. I think a lot of people thought that when Trump was gone, we were going to return to the status quo, like what things were like before Trump. And I think that what we realized, or what people in, Obama White House have realized, is that the press conferences under Trump were completely absurd and did nothing, zero, for anyone. In fact, they were actively bad. And I was one of those people at the time who said the press shouldn't go to those, right? Like, it's just a chance for Trump to throw gotchas at them and for them to throw gotchas at him.
And it was also like a real traditional propaganda.
Exactly.
Thing.
They are incredibly.
I mean, from day one,
situations.
The crowds with Spicer to all the way through COVID, just constant propaganda. Very similar to, I would imagine, if you want to make your historical reference now, go for it.
Oh, maybe to Mussolini, but I think even Mussolini did a much better job of coming across as a vaguely sane person. But I think it's not so much that it's about Trump. It's that the power mismatch is so intense in that room, where even a complete doddering, corrupt fool like Trump can come in there and dominate. And I came to the conclusion after watching that, I honestly don't care. I would wish those reporters were out doing stories rather than being go to Jen Psaki, have the White House press secretary do their thing. If the president comes out 3-4 times a year and that takes questions at random, totally good by me. But this idea that there needs to be press conferences all the time, frankly, it's outdated. And the argument is, well, when do we get a chance to get the president face to face and to find out what's going on? Well, frankly, we get more granular knowledge about what's happening in White Houses now, even the Trump White House, than they did 40 years ago. Right. I mean, the Nixon White House was completely opaque. The Johnson White House was completely opaque.
Yeah.
I mean,
plus you have a billion media outlets with credentials and access to report on them. So you get all kinds of, from Axios to New York Times to Fox News.
Right. And back then, the people in the media were generally of the same class and background as the people they were reporting on. That's really not true now, except for, frankly, in that press conference room, in the pool, as they call it, which I did that in quotes because I think that's a completely douchey name. But
why? The press pool.
Because it's just like, it's one of those things that people use as like, hey, I'm an insider in D.C. It's not the White House press conference. It's the pool, right? Yeah. It's sort of the that book, This Town, all capitalized.
Yeah.
Just makes me want to vomit.
Mark.
Yeah. It's just like,
what's his name? Forget that guy's
Lieberman?
name. New York Times. Yeah, I think you're right.
You'll see on Twitter that I often, when I am posting about something that is an actual real like neighborhoods DC thing, I say This Town, all lowercase. Trying to point out that like there is a real DC,
right?
That has nothing to do with all this, people going to fundraisers. But the point is that the press conference with the president up there has kind of lost its reason for being. It doesn't do what it used to do. For starters, in that presidents are far better prepared than they used to be. There was maybe a couple of years in there with Bill Clinton, or even then. I mean, look at Bill Clinton during the Monica Lewinsky thing. Did we ever learn anything in those press conferences? I don't remember anything that I went, wow, that's brand new and totally shocking. It's really just a way for the White House to get their story out and for the media to pose as, these carriers of the burning flame of truth and accountability. And honestly, if they did in-depth stories, that would be better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they might say they can do both things at once, but I don't know. I've never been in that job. Know people who have when I was back at Sirius, obviously. But I like when Obama gave those press conferences because I always liked when he answered questions because I thought he was good at explaining things and why he viewed them the way that he did. It was really helpful to me. But all right, let's move on past the press conference thing and ask you about the rescue bill, the giant $1.9 trillion check to America for COVID relief, for schools, for vaccination, and for so much more. And what I'm hearing from my anti-poverty policy expert friends is so encouraging, Bill. These are the most cynical people who've been fighting for years to fight against child poverty, hunger, insecurity in the United States of America, the richest country in the world. And so there's a lot of bitterness and cynicism. And I am hearing those same people light up over this and what it does to cut child poverty. Of course, Joe Biden's been out there and Democrats been out there touting that. And they're juxtaposing it, of course, against what the Trump tax cuts did, which were about the same amount and helped the people at the top. So that's how one way it's being framed. But what do you make of this entire bill, the process with which it was passed, and the effect that it's going to have on the economy and people's lives?
Well, I think that the bottom line is that the era of small government is over, I think is the best way to put it. Republicans have burnt all of their fiscal conservative credentials to the ground. And they had started way before Trump, to be fair. But after Trump, there's just no argument to be made anymore that fiscal austerity is a thing that anyone should take seriously.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter that there's no argument, Bill. It doesn't matter that they are hypocrites or that they've contradicted themselves. I mean, convince me that it does matter that they have completely, and because I would argue they've never been fiscally conservative.
They've
Republicans
they've always been full of shit on that issue, but they've always been able to wind up the base with that issue, and that's what really mattered, right?
Well, but they still can. I think that's my point. They still will.
So here's an example, and it's the only example that I think really matters. When's the last time you saw a $1.9 trillion bill to give money to brown and poor people go through on a 50-50 Senate or any close Senate without almost anything significant being done to lower that number? And when's the last time you saw something like that happen where a big bill went through with huge spending and people on the right did not go into meltdown? Right? There was no meltdown. There was no Tea Party. There was no, I forget that guy's name, screaming on CNBC. There was no None of that happened. Literally $1.9 trillion. It's going to cut childhood poverty in half. It's going to do all kinds of like huge things to, on every issue, every wish list you could have if you were a person who cared about poverty in the United States. It's going to be taking money, in effect, away from rich people. And no one said a word about it. It went through. It sailed through, basically. The 300 versus 400, all that's window dressing. This enormous bill went through and the GOP could not muster a single protest about it. That's amazing. And that's a phase change. That's a big deal. Because in the past, who was the guy? Santelli? Yeah. You remember that?
Yeah.
That guy fucking activated people. Like, people went out and voted on that. And we're not getting any of that.
Well,
Nothing.
It's a completely different time and cause of the economic collapse. And I think that's the fact that COVID destroyed the economy, a virus. Everybody understands that versus the housing bubble and all of the credit default swaps, the deregulation of the financial industry. That's complicated. It's harder to understand. It's easy to demagogue. This is harder. Everybody, not everybody, but most people are struggling and losing and realize why the government needs to do what they do. And finally, if the government's handing out money, you're generally not getting too much of a reaction. What do you think of all that?
I think that's an ex post facto justification. I think because it didn't blow up this time, you're looking at what happened last time and saying, well, it doesn't. People in 2008, bankers blew the economy up. They got bailed out and not a single one went to jail. That's easy to demagogue. That's simple to demagogue. It's a straight up story. It didn't have legs. Why didn't it have legs? Because the GOP back then still had some vestige of a political argument to make that people would believe. Right? It was absurd. Look at the savings and loan scandal going back even farther, or Enron, or all these things. Our political culture up until now was to let those things go. But if you tried to spend money on minority kids who were poor in the city, that was a completely awful thing, and you couldn't do it. And the GOP would fight it. And, remember, 35% of this country are still fire-breathing Trump supporters. Even those people aren't out freaking out about this. It's not showing up in the polling. There's no protest, nothing. Their own politicians kind of tiredly tried to stop it, but didn't really work very hard to keep it from happening. And that's why I said at the beginning of this, that this period of the age of small government is over. Clearly. It's clearly changed. And that's a big deal.
Why? What does it mean politically? What does that mean about the discussion in Washington or on cable news or in people's homes and fire pits?
What it means is that you're not going to get the sort of Tea Party wave out there voting on something like this. And that's a really big deal, because if Democrats could spend money, Mitch McConnell's genius was always spend a ton of money during Republican administrations and then turn off the tap during Democratic administrations. So the Democrats always politically had to pay for that austerity, right? Whereas Republicans could get a big boost to the economy from all of the government spending that McConnell pushed forward while there were Republicans in the White House.
Right.
Well, now that doesn't happen anymore, right? Biden is going to juice the economy with tons of money, with all the spending that's going to push. And by the way, the spending is going to do a lot of things. Minimum wage is going up. Poorer people are going to have money. These are all things that the kind of spending that goes right into poorer people's pockets, and that money has a lot of velocity. If I live in Southeast DC and I am a single mom and I get $6,000 a year to help pay for my kids, shoes and food, I'm not going and buying Bitcoin with that money. I'm spending that money tomorrow. I'm spending it immediately. I'm going to try to raise my kids' standard of living right away.
Right.
And that dollar will then go to the grocer, who will then spend it on wages. And then that money, you're right. This money will really push the economy in a really strong way, and from the bottom up instead of from the top down. That is going to do some fundamental things for inequality in this country, for starters.
Yeah.
Right. If you cut childhood poverty in half, that's a big thing to help with inequality.
It's such a massive deal, and I'm very interested and curious to see how it plays out. because there are a lot of concerns amongst policy experts that it's well-intentioned, but for one example is it's well-intentioned, it'll definitely be effective, but if people don't know that the money is there, and it's not just that it goes automatically, I'm not talking about just the checks, the services that it's now providing, like you can't set people up with a community center and no one knows that it exists. And so there's some concern about that. So, my point is it remains to be seen how these things will actually affect poverty, but experts overwhelmingly are encouraged to see the capital there, the resources there for the first time ever. And now it's supposed to sunset potentially a lot of these benefits around the time of the midterm elections, is my understanding. And so politically, it's really interesting because now Democrats are going to have the argument, well, if you don't vote to renew this, it's in effect a tax increase. You're going to increase taxes, Republicans. And so politically, it seems to have been well timed as well.
Yes. And I described what McConnell has always done in the past. Well, Joe Biden has just reversed that game on McConnell. So leading into the midterms, Republicans are going to have to decide, are we the guy who's starving poor people or poor kids or not? And, remember, too, that, there's certainly the concern about, do people realize these programs are there, realize it benefits them? This is not the 1970s where there's a lot of aid flowing out. We're in an era where all these things have been constricted for a really long time. And it's not just in the cities. In rural America, way more than there used to be. People are desperate for this kind of help.
Yeah.
Does it change their voting habits? No. But does it hurt Democrats? Very definitely not. There's every indication to think that it will help Democrats to, if it does nothing else than keep people from being wildly motivated to go vote against Democrats, it's already a big advantage. So I would just say that it's a, can you be sure that this is like a winner in 2022? No. But you'd much rather be the guy holding this than the guy who's saying, nah, sorry, I think we're just going to let all this sunset and, tough shit on the kids.
Right. I wanted to ask you about, I mentioned as always, well, actually, I often don't tell you what I want to talk about. We just go. But tonight I was giving you a few topics. And one I didn't ask you about is how closely you're paying attention to the investigation into the insurrection of January 6th in your town. And how you think that is going. And I just want to say something else for you to react to, which is there is a horrible day for so many reasons, obviously the loss of life. But I think the consequences of that day are very important and good. In a way, in many ways, and specifically in that Donald Trump lost so much capital, and in every way, including money, but political capital. And his niece, Mary Trump, told Business Insider she believes he's more upset about being kicked off Twitter and losing the chance to host the 2022 PGA Championship than he is about losing the 2020 election, and that makes total sense. And that's as a result of the insurrection and his encouraging it and not stopping it. How closely are you watching it? Do you think the investigation is going well? And what do you make of the consequences thus far of the insurrection, like Donald Trump losing Twitter?
Right. So I would say this. Let's start with the last thing, because I think it may be the most salient thing for most people. It's a huge deal that he lost Twitter because it's the one thing that he showed a certain amount of feral genius for. Right. He was good at using Twitter to activate the people that he needed to activate to have political power. And losing it took away from him his immediate way to punish people who violated his wants and to prove people who supplied his needs. And so that's a big deal because, this is not a guy who can organize a movement and really build up sort of a machine. In
any traditional way, but with social media, almost anybody can.
Well, anyone can try, but to be, Trump happened to capture a moment. I always tell you this, that Trump is just the bumbling a-hole who happened to be the right bumbling a-hole for the moment that he arrived.
Yeah.
right?
Trump Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich, they built them.
Right. I mean, and by the way, this is equally true of people like Mussolini and Hitler. These guys, 10 years earlier, 10 years later, you'd never have known who they were. But they happened to be the right guy at the right moment. And Trump was the right guy to channel the rage of sort of Vortrekker white American people who think they're, quote unquote, losing the country and in real respects are falling behind where the country's going. That's kind of Donald Trump, if you think about it. Donald Trump couldn't put together a big, real estate deal that made any real money his entire life. He was his father's generation of real estate guy. And he never caught up, and he always made less money or went broke relative to all the other big real estate guys he knew. And so, Trump is sort of the right guy at the right moment, but he cannot build a movement. He's incapable of that, which meant that Twitter gave him a way to go out there and lash people and push people and get, the regular, quote unquote, regular guy saying, fuck yeah, that guy's on my side. Trump's problem is that the regular guy isn't going to be digging too deeply to find out what Trump is saying. Like if Trump started a Substack, he's going to get some people. Well, he's going to get 10 million people, maybe.
But I look at it this way. It's not our, the regular guy is not looking for what Trump's saying. It's more that Trump could say a thing that we weren't thinking about. He could inject it into the conversation, into the day, out of nowhere.
And the media loved it and reported it.
Well, all right.
I mean, seriously, part of this is he gets $2 billion. He got two. They did and they didn't. I mean, you and I were around for 2016, and perhaps I should say the way they reported it gave fuel and push to what he was doing. They knew better by 2020, I think, but most of them did anyway. But Trump, it wasn't just Trump. Again, it's what I say, like this guy's the bumbling idiot who happened to be the right bumbling idiot.
All right,
he also hit the media. And so let me just say one quick thing. The other thing is that I don't think that losing Twitter is a bigger deal to him than losing the White House. And here's why. He is probably getting indicted. And he's probably going to be in a lot worse shape a year from now than he is today.
The Manhattan DA investigation or somewhere else?
I think so. I think it's Georgia. I think it's Manhattan. I think there's a ton. I know for a fact there's a ton of civil suits out there.
Yep.
This guy's life doesn't get better going forward. And I know. I actually chuckle evilly too when I think about this. But so, I mean, you even see the pictures where he's like emceeing at some weird dog.
Yeah, but everybody's overdoing it. Everybody's like, oh, is he unhealthy? No, he's just not painted orange. He's normally painted orange. He wasn't painted orange in that picture. That's it.
But it's just, I mean, look at the carnival barker descent that he has made.
Yeah.
And I think that two things people don't realize. Number one is that the legal protection afforded to him by the White House was immense. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
point.
Number one.
Yep.
And number two, I did a lot of reading while he was in the White House of all the sort of people I thought had a better sense of what was happening in the White House. And the one thing they all said was he loved every second of the pomp and circumstance of being president. It's the only thing he liked about it. And I think he, in a real way, is diminished. I really do. I think that's kind of thing. It's the guy who never expected to pitch in the World Series and goes and pitches a no-hitter. And then he never makes it back to a playoff game the rest of his life. I think that's Trump.
I don't love that analogy because it doesn't do enough. It's just not brutal enough in a way. That pitcher might have been a good guy. That's the problem for me. That's the problem with your analogy. I think he is probably a decent guy. He just never got back there.
That's the angry drunk who manages to get to the World Series.
All right, that's better.
And then never makes it back again. How's that?
So that's better. So the answer to the other part of that question, the first part, how closely are you following the investigation and insurrection, and how important are the consequences, do you think?
Well, having seen sort of the outskirts of the insurrection up front and what it did to D.C. and everything else, I follow it very closely without being obsessive about it. But if there's something in the news about it, I read all of it. Today, they got the two guys who bear sprayed Officer Sicknick, in theory, or it is supposed that led to Officer Sicknick's death.
Yeah.
Of course, the one guy was like a guy from New Jersey who lived in Pennsylvania who sort of struggled through college for a long time, ended up working as like an assistant manager of a restaurant. It's exactly the guys you think. It's a white dude in the burbs who thinks that he ought to be the president of a company and is actually just a nebbish who just couldn't do it. The other guy owns a sandwich shop in Morgantown, Pennsylvania, and is known for being a local asshole. I mean, like, they're exactly who you'd expect. I think the investigation is, I mean, I'm just being blunt.
Yeah, no, I mean, the kind of person that there used to be this name for people who call radio shows, including you, which is a P1. Awesome. People are engaged. In that case, it wasn't insulted. They're so engaged and so passionate. And in your case, actually had something really great to offer. There's a lot of callers, listeners, people I learned from all the time. But these guys that showed up at the insurrection, they're so engaged. They're so passionate. Right. They're Fox News or Alex Jones all the time, all their free time. They're hook, line, and sinker, top elite performers. That's why they went all the way to D.C. and rated. Yeah, that's how I look at them. So anyway, I'm not surprised by the descriptions of them. When you see it, you're like, you're always, almost every one of them. You're like, of course.
Yeah, it's almost never like a bank president or even it's almost never a guy who like shows up every Saturday morning at the soup kitchen to help out.
No, because it's all those people really did. I do have a certain sympathy for them. And everybody who bought the lie that the election was stolen. If I believe the election was stolen, and they did, then I would be outraged too. But there's a certain level of critical thinking and education that requires. It may sound sanctimonious and elitist, but that the woman who was shot and killed, I forget her name, but she had gone down the rabbit hole for years. Apparently, she was making videos out of her car, screaming at her phone about QAnon.
See, you're kinder about this than I am.
Go ahead.
My feeling about this is that Trump is flypaper for assholes, and his entire political persona was empowering assholes to openly be assholes. Now, is there a subset of people who are totally lunatics, like the lady who got shot in the hill? Sure. But I think a lot of it is, it's people I grew up with who I know are not stupid, but they want to have their chance to say what they've always wanted to say, and Trump gave them the opportunity to do it. They're pissed off that they can't say the N-word since 1979, right? So now Trump comes along and suddenly that's okay because he's going to show you, right? Like it's that mentality. And so, but we got on a bit of a sidetrack. What do I think of the investigation? I think the investigation's going really well, actually, because what they're doing is, they're now in the upper 200s, I believe, of people that have been indicted. And what they're doing is indicting people for like the immediate cause that they can indict them for. And then they're going in and asking a lot of questions, and they're doing superseding indictments. What they're really looking to do is break the organizations, so-called, or maybe it's a little kind to call them organizations, but to break the networks that led those people there. And that's a really good thing. I talked to some people in D.C. who kind of work on this stuff. And the idea is if you just go and arrest 6 people individually who were oath keepers, who came there together, that's not nearly as useful as, okay, when did you organize it? Who decided to do this? The head of the oath keepers, by the way, there's some chatter that he is implicated in some of this in some way, that he was communicating with the folks who were there that day. Those are how you scare those organizations away from doing violent things.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because they go, oh, shit.
Yes.
It's one thing. But, if I pick the phone, if you call me and you're from the Oath Keeper Lodge number 152 in Raleigh, North Carolina, and you're the president of the Oath Keepers, and you say, hey, we're going to do this thing. If I'm on the other end of that phone and I don't want to go to jail, I go, no, you're not. No, thanks. I want nothing to do with it. You hang up. Right? It creates a really diminishing
If you
effect.
see investigations, arrests, indictments, and actual consequences for people who do these types of things, it makes other people who might consider it realize we still have law and order even for white insurrectionists. I think that's an important thing that gets lost. These people are all getting arrested. That's that's what you're saying. And I think it's a great point. So it makes other people who might think about their local state house and walking through there with their Confederate flag and bashing windows and being violent and to not do that. You will be arrested and prosecuted to a high extent.
People to do it. And not to call 50 people and say, hey, let's all go do this.
Yeah, because some of them are now going to be, no, I'm good. I'm good.
Yep. No, that being said, apparently in the last couple of days, somebody caught a Capitol Hill police officer reading the protocols of the Elders of Zion, sitting at his door desk. And that guy's now been suspended. So
yeah, not a good. It's usually a book. I highly recommend that you put that book inside another book when reading it where other people are. It
was described as a stained and dog-eared copy.
Oh God, it was signed by Bannon.
Yeah, exactly. It'd been in Bannon's, underwear. For
I got to run and get
years.
Ava. Yeah. Last word on it all. I mean, am I rushing you out? Did you finish on the insurrection part of it?
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. That's good.
All right, let me quickly tell you. I was going to tell this story just earlier on the opening of the podcast, but I just want to get your quick reaction to it. I was at a deli today. Me and two other people. Customers, and then the managers behind the register. And if I see someone at the deli or the gas station with their mask off or below their nose, I don't say anything. I don't want any trouble. I mean, I got my mask on, and I'm just not going around policing other people's masks. I don't do that. But if someone else does, I'm fine with it. I'm okay with that. Sure. Someone saying it because for whatever reason they're concerned. Standing there at the deli, man comes in, says hi to the managers, and starts giving them a little grief as people do when they're familiar with other people, and as guys do. And this woman says, "Sir, could you please put your mask up?" And the guy says to her, "Mind your own business, lady."
Wow.
Now my fuse gets lit, Bill.
Yeah.
And I breathe fire. All the pent up fire I've had for the last year on this one man. And he says to me, "I'm sick of people telling me what to do." I said, "Sir, you walked in here with a shirt on, with your shoes on, with your tires on your car. It's the same thing wearing a mask. We all got to do it to be able to come in to the store." And then he goes, "Fuck you, motherfucker." And I go, "Fuck you all day and for the rest of time." He goes, "Let's do this right now." Gets in my face. Now, granted, Bill, I would not have gotten that angry if it was a big guy or a guy who I found more threatening. This guy was maybe 55, my height, with a huge belly.
Old guys fighting, great.
Right. Gets in takes a step to me, Bill. I don't even move. If anything, I take a step closer and I yell right in his face. I go, "Do it. Hit me. There's fucking 50 cameras on both of us right now. Do it. I can't wait for you to do it because I will wait for you to get out of jail to meet you in court." Dude turns on his heel, walks out, applause break for me. Actually,
nice. No one
applauded, barely even said anything. But in my head, there was applause, and I was brave. But I know people hearing this story be like, "What are you, stupid? You're going to get stabbed. You're going to get knifed."
Yeah.
But at the same time, I couldn't deal with that. But the key line, I'm sick of people telling me what to do.
Well, sure. I mean, what did the old lady do, by the way?
She was like, "Well, thank you."
Bail out?
She just said no. She was like, "Thank you." I know that guy. I can't stand those people. Just kind of stormed out. She's a little eccentric herself, which is why she spoke up. Maybe, I don't know, but this guy's like, "Mind your own business, lady." I'm like, "That's it." Boom, snapped.
Yeah, my method in these situations, Pete, is the raised eyebrows at somebody.
Yeah,
like you got to be kidding me, look.
Yeah.
And if the guy said anything, I mean, I think the nice way to say that is, maybe it not going to hurt you, but you could kill her. Because I've actually said that to somebody.
Yep. We've only got a couple more weeks of it, but I've been good. I haven't had a problem with anybody until today.
Well, so I will tell you that about a month ago, somebody was kvetching about wearing masks. And I said, "No, 4 people in my family are dead. I think you can wear a mask."
Yes, you did tell me that. All right, I'm late. I had to share that story with you and get your judgment.
Go.
Thank you very much, sir.
I think it was fine and better that you said, "Go ahead and punch me," than you punched him. So.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'm never throwing the first punch. Thank you, sir.
Smart. All right, buddy.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye.
There you go, Bill B in DC, at Bill B in DC. Tell him that you heard him here on the show, and let me know what you thought of my heroic stand at the deli. Yet another very heroic, very noble, I haven't said anything. I haven't gotten into it with anybody, as a matter of fact. To be fair, I haven't spent a ton of time out in public to be exposed to a lot of crazies. And like I said, most people wear their masks. But I had a lot of pent-up aggression, apparently. And the guy started with me, and I wasn't backing down. Julia was upset that she missed it. She was out in the car. But, could he have had a knife? Could he have had a gun? Sure. But I just couldn't deal with that kind of attitude out in public. I'm sick of people telling me what to do. That's the white male Republican mantra. I'm sick of people telling me what to do. Nobody's telling you what to do. Such nonsense. Okay, so enough of that. Let's get to my next guest. I'm very, very happy to introduce him to you if you're not familiar with him already, which I wasn't until just a few weeks ago when I heard about his work. He is a writer and a historian. He's written several books, studied history, French, politics at university. He was intending to become a diplomat, but instead he actually became a judge. He was a judge in Australia and educated in the United Kingdom. He's traveled extensively, and this new book is fascinating and super important, and I was very excited to talk with him about it. It's called America in Retreat, The Decline of U.S. Leadership from World War II to COVID-19. I hooked up with Michael Pembroke, who was down in Australia, via Zoom. We had a great conversation. Here we go. So here he is now, Michael Pembroke. So excited and honored to be in conversation with you. Congratulations on America in Retreat.
Thank you, Peter. Nice to be with you.
I'm very excited to talk with you about this. I love talking about history and foreign policy, and having lived through, some of what you write about here. It's really so important and interesting. But, sir, I have to, right here at the top, how dare you? I mean, you're not an American, and you're sitting down there in cushy old Australia, all free of the COVID, seemingly, and you're lobbing a whole book at us saying that America is in decline. What gives, sir?
Well, Peter, I'm a friend of America. I've, when I was 17, I was on TV in Dallas, breakfast TV, talking about Nixon, I think it was. It was about the time he went to China. So I've been to America many times. Most recently, I was at Princeton for a while on sabbatical. I've seen a lot, but I've also seen a lot of the world. Luckily for me, I went to school for a little while in England, and university in England, and university in Australia. Traveled a lot, so I think I have a worldly view, and America does occupy an important part of the post-war world. In fact, no other nation, and this is a criticism, has uniformly attempted to transform other nations into its own liberal, democratic, capitalist image as much as the United States has in the last 75 years. So we're all affected by it across Asia. Especially the Middle East, there's a lot of resentment at the unilateralism of America and the desire to change nations, and that's part of the motivation for this book.
Well defended, sir. I mean, your bio says that you were in Washington, D.C., as you said, during the time of Watergate. Chicago, you were in Chicago when the Obamacare legislation was passed, and in New York City shortly after 9/11. As well as New Jersey during the first year of the Trump presidency. You've also traveled through North Korea and around the world, so you understand as well as anybody, being a scholar, a writer, and having all the experiences that you had, that context is everything, perspective is everything, and however, have you not been to America and lived in America long enough to understand that we do not care about context? We are the only country in the globe, according to a lot of us. Do you not realize that?
I do realize that, and I encounter it from time to time. That's probably one of my criticisms of the approach to China. It may be softening under the new president and Mr. Blinken, but the ascendant American approach has traditionally been binary. You're either good or you're evil. You're either with us or against us, and it's not like that. There are democracies and there are countries that are not democratic, and there are countries in between. And there's room for all types And that's what many countries, and China is one of them, are saying now. They want a multipolar world. They want a voice for everyone. You know, Peter, when the United Nations was set up, and America was instrumental in setting it up, there were only 50 nations that signed the UN Charter in 1945. China was the first nation to sign, by the way, and but nearly all of those nations were allies or supporters of the United States, including China. There are now 193 countries who are members of the United Nations, and it's perfectly clear that Washington doesn't like that. It doesn't like giving an equal voice to every other country, but that's the way the UN Charter was established. It was we give priority to some of the bigger countries by putting them on the UN Security Council, but they all have a say and they all have to be taken into account. And there's not one size that fits all.
I want to get more specific in this book and what you write about and ask you some specific questions. But one more general, I'm going to call this another accusation, sir. You seem like a China apologist. Pembroke, defend yourself.
Well, I'm not an apologist, but I'm a pragmatist and I'm a strategic realist. China's population is 4 times that of the United States. It's about double that of the West, meaning the UK, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. It's for 18 of the last 20 centuries, and I don't think enough people realize this. For 18 of the last 20 centuries, China's economy has been the biggest in the world. If you look at the charts, it only started to collapse at the beginning of the 19th century when the Industrial Revolution in the West took hold. The biggest cities in the world were once in China. I'm just one of those who hold the view that we are returning to normal in the long sweep of history. There are those that call the last 200 years an aberration. I can understand why they say that. And there's an American historian who has referred to the 200-year blip in the history of the world, the 200-year blip being the last couple of centuries of Western dominance. So, I just take the view that rather than fighting with China, we should all be working with China, and we can all profit from that. There's a lot of money to be made from dealing with China and improving the world, and not just money. I mean, China wants to take an active role in relation to climate change, in relation to biopharma, in relation to lots of things. I think cooperation is better than antagonism.
Can we agree, sir, that the 90s was the greatest decade in America? Okay, moving on. To hear you talk about these time periods in the last 200 years in America, it's like, well, this is the time that I'm American. And then I started thinking about my own perspective. The 90s is pretty good, before phones and when we had a half pipe, and it was great to be white. So I have one just general question that I always like to think about, and I think that you do touch on this in many different ways in your book, but the kind of the difference between the powers that are United States and China, and I know you're going to correct all of this here, but let me muddle through, which is that America is a, quote, democracy, and we fight over all kinds of things, and we create new laws, and then we repeal them, and then we decide maybe we'll create this kind of electric car, maybe we won't, and we're all over the place, and it's messy because that's democracy. China has a drum, and when they beat the drum, electric cars come out. The point is, in my disrespect for China, their system is far more efficient because they just get things done. When America, we say the government shouldn't be choosing the winners and the losers. In China, they say government is definitely picking the winners and the future is blank, and that's what we're going to do. Is anything that I just said make any sense at all?
It makes sense. It's fine. It's I understand it, and there's no problem with it. But there is an assumption lying behind your statement, and that is that democratic values, Western values, are universal. And they're not. They are simply not. There are 4.5 billion people in Asia. Most of them don't adhere to democratic values. The Chinese approach is that collective security, collective welfare is more important than individual freedom. Now, that's a valid point of view. We may not like it. We may think it's strange. We may think it's unfair, but it's another approach to organizing society. And the great error that I think we've made in the last 75 years is to think that there is only one proper system of government, and that's the democratic system, and that we should seek to impose it on all other countries. I adhere to the view that it's the best system myself. I like the freedoms that democracy gives me. But in a big country, a complex country with billions of people and many people who are struggling financially, they like the system they've got because it ensures their prosperity. China has brought 800 million people out of poverty. And that's something that they should be credited with and applauded for.
Before I move back into the book, just because you're talking about different kinds of government and because it's topical and because I believe that you are a member of the Commonwealth, what do you think of monarchies?
Look, they're historical. All the monarchies around the world are relics of a bygone era, but most of them preside over a democratic government beneath them. They're not going anywhere in a rush, although, if we had a vote tomorrow in Australia, I'd have my hand up for a republic, but it wouldn't be anything other than a nominal change because we'd still have the same system of government underneath.
Right. So let's work our way backward in your book, America in Retreat, because we're talking about China and America, and you go from the end of from World War II all the way to COVID-19, and many fascinating chapters and things that I think most Americans who read your book will know very little of much of what you talked about here. But just, is it fair to look at COVID-19 and the reaction to it in terms of America's reaction to it versus China's reaction to it, to point to what it means for the future? Because in America, we're arguing about whether masks are manly enough. And in China, if you're sick, you just go stay in the sick hotel. That's it. There's no questions asked.
Well, look, I finished the book in February last year, and we're in the editing process, and the publisher and I thought we just needed to bring it forward, so we brought it forward to about April, May. COVID-19 is just the finishing point. The point I was at pains to make throughout the whole book was that this is not an anti-Trump book in itself. It's not a book about what COVID-19 has revealed about the state of the American polity. I was trying to show that there has been a linear movement from 1945 to the present, and the trend has not been good. Pete, when Barack Obama was in his last day of office, he turned to his closest advisor and said that his greatest worry is, what if we were wrong? And the point of my book is, I think we were wrong. And I say we because so many other countries like Australia supported the United States. I think we were wrong to set out shortly after 1945 to proselytize democracy. And by the way, the views that I've expressed are very similar to the views expressed 50 years ago by Senator William Fulbright, who was the longest-serving chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. He said something that struck me, many things actually, but one of them is this. He thought that the universal mission was a great weakness in the American approach, and that we, that is the American people, were beset by the assumption that force is the ultimate proof of superiority, and that when a nation shows that it has the stronger army, it is also proving that it has better people, better institutions, better principles, and in general, a better civilization. Well, I think he's right, and most of us have been wrong for a long time.
It's just a provable falsity based on the time period that you chose, that on paper, certainly we had the most well-trained, well-funded military with bases and the best technology, communications, everything, night vision, everything you would need from the sky. And yet we lost every major conflict that we fought in, because it doesn't matter how good your equipment is if you're fighting an insurgency. But you write in your book about Korea and Vietnam, Iraq, and more. And all of those conflicts, the mighty American military lost because, frankly, in my opinion, talking to some of the same people you've talked to for your book, including my friend Andy Basevich, these are not conflicts that our military, or frankly any military, is trained or really invested in wanting to win in the streets of Iraq, where I just spoke to last week a Marine who lost both his legs in Fallujah. And he's like, why were we there? And so the point is, we can have the best military, but we haven't won any of these conflicts. The proof is in the history, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a great difference between defending your nation against someone like Hitler, who made it clear he wanted to take over Western Europe. That was an entirely appropriate approach. But and self-defense is a recognized exception in the UN Charter to military intervention and a unilateral resort to war. And that's about the only time it's justified. So to send an invasion force across the world to try to impose, and I use the word impose deliberately, democracy on other countries is I'm afraid, and I regret to say, a terrible mistake.
That's just an understatement, though. I mean, I'm reading your book and I'm thinking about 9/11. I was in New York City on 9/11. And the reaction to that, I remember I was in Chicago on October 7th when American warplanes flew in. There were already special operations in Afghanistan, which may have been appropriate, arguably, but to go after a few Al-Qaeda members that were there. But I was terrified. I was like, this is a terrible, terrible mistake. This will be just like Vietnam. This will not go well. And so many experts knew that. You write all about that. I mean, we went into Iraq, a country who didn't attack us, on a lie. And it's very easy, sir, for Americans to forget that. Not veterans, but for the vast majority of us. And because I covered it and talked to so many, I think about it quite a bit. And reading your book, of course, I'm thinking about it a lot. Can we just talk about the understatement that you made and apply it to Iraq?
Well, the understatement being it was a mistake.
I mean, it was a mistake that damaged America's reputation around the world for two generations, at least. It was a stupid, embarrassing, horrible, horrible crime.
I think the 2003 invasion of Iraq was the beginning of the end of the American century. I really do, because you can't maintain leadership when you've lost credibility, and you can't maintain leadership in the face of your own hypocrisy. So it was transparent. I don't even know if you can say there was a lie. It was transparent that the invasion of Iraq was an exercise in exceptionalism, an attempt to impose Washington's view of how a government should be on another country. I should say, and this is why I've said that my starting point is 1945, the very same thing happened in Korea. I didn't know this until I started to do my research for my last book on Korea, but that war in Korea was authorized by the UN Security Council, and the authorization was to establish peace and security at the border, the 38th parallel. It was perfectly plain that the then president and Dean Acheson, the then Secretary of State, had no intention of stopping at the 38th parallel. They wanted to Having complained about the North Koreans crossing the 38th parallel heading south, they had no compunction about crossing the 38th parallel heading north and attempting to impose regime change on Pyongyang. That was the great error. The war was over after 3 months. The UN Security Council resolution had been achieved. The North Koreans had been pushed back to the border. But it went for another 3 years with tragic consequences. It brought China into the war. They weren't involved to start with and had no intention of getting involved. But it brought China in because the Americans went all the way to the Chinese border. And then when the Chinese came in, the Americans then engaged in the longest retreat in US military history. So it was a disaster. And it just set the pattern for what followed. It set the pattern for Vietnam and everything else, but we haven't learned
the
lesson.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think that one generation of leaders witnessed World War II, which is important context, then Korea, then Vietnam, and then my dad, who's 76, said, if my generation who experienced Vietnam goes into Iraq, we've learned nothing. We're just dummies. And that's exactly what we did. So what about Vietnam? Because that was the next domino, quote, to never fall.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you say is all very sensible. But, what I think, and Andrew Bacevich will say this as well, there is a military and defense and intelligence establishment in Washington which thinks in a narrow silo. They don't reflect, I think, what ordinary intelligent people know. Now, Vietnam...
But they drum up the public support of the American people, and we can talk about how. So, I mean, I think that we're responsible in the end.
Yeah, that's true. Look, you asked me about Vietnam. I don't think everyone fully understands that the Americans were in Vietnam from about the early 1950s. As they came out of Korea, they were going into Vietnam. Yeah. They were funding the French.
Right.
The French then lost the Battle of Dien Bien Phu and retired in 1954. The Americans were pouring money and advisors in from 1954 onwards. This war didn't start in 1963 with John Kennedy. It started 10 years before. It was a 20-year campaign that was doomed to fail from the outset. The Americans put in a Catholic president who they parachuted from a seminary at Maryknoll up near you in New Jersey. This president had been given a blessing by Cardinal Spellman, who was a big Catholic figure at the time in the 1950s. And he then turned on them after a while. He and his brother said, we're not going to be pushed around anymore. We're not going to do what you want all the time. We're not puppets. And the result was that his assassination was engineered, and I've explained that in the book. So, and that's because he turned on America and because he wasn't winning America's war in Vietnam. No, and the money is a problem. And there's an interesting historical parallel, Pete. 2,000 years ago, there were two great empires, Rome in the west and China in the east, Han China it was. And but Rome could not sustain its prosperity, and there were several reasons for that, part altogether from the invading Visigoths and other northern tribes. The reasons were these. They had a trade imbalance with China. Their currency became debased, and they could not afford their expansive militarism and their empire of bases from Scotland to Spain to the Rhineland to the Balkans to Syria and North Africa. And that is a major reason why the Roman Empire collapsed. China was selling silk in large quantities to Rome. It also used the silk as a currency and to pay its troops. The silk was a renewable and infinite resource. The bullion which the Romans paid for the silk and other imports was a finite resource, and it had to end in tragedy, in tears. China also at that time, and probably historically, preferred to avoid expensive military conflicts and it preferred to purchase peace through tribute, as it called it, or bribery, and economic statecraft. It's still the same today. It spent less on its military institutions and more on its bureaucracy. China has always had a very, very powerful and clever bureaucracy.
What is their GDP percentage that they pay as their budget for military versus America's? Do you know? I mean, you always hear the statistic about America spends more than the next 10 countries combined, or some insane statistic like that.
It's more than the next 9 countries combined. I looked at this yesterday. China's, because they've just had a People's Congress and they've announced a new 5-year plan. They spend 1.2%, I think it is, of GDP on their military. It's much less than the United States.
You've got a great. I know we just got a couple more minutes here, and I just love reading this book and talking with you about it. And I think folks will really enjoy it and gain a lot of perspective from the way that you put it, and be slightly concerned, to say the least. But let's talk about the CIA. We got to talk about the CIA. Lots to say about the different influence operations that they've been running since, I guess you start in the book, I think around the early 50s. I mean, when the CIA really was formed and took power, but trying to influence and overthrow governments from Central and South America to obviously Iran and the Middle East. Where are the successes?
I think nearly all, if not all, have been counterproductive, even when there have been temporary successes.
Right.
I start actually in 1948 with the Italian general elections. And that was the greatest interference in a democratic election that there has been for a long time. And I suspect much more blatant than the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. The thinking at the time was, because much of Western Europe was turning towards the Communist Party, they were worn out by the war and wanted a better world, and they liked the aspirations of communism at the time. The thinking in Washington, in the CIA, was if a democratic process in Italy may lead to a communist government, we are going to use illegal and undemocratic processes to stop it. And they did. The next one that I mentioned, which is terribly important in current events, is Iran. In 1953, coming out of Korea, when they refused to agree to a peace treaty, and they refused to agree to a resolution of the division of Vietnam at the Geneva Conference in 1954. The government of Iran was a democratic government. The prime minister was a Democrat. He wasn't a communist. He was a man called Mossadegh. There was an issue about the resumption, the public resumption of oil wells belonging to the British in Iran. And the Americans had a fear that there would be some sort of communist insurgency. So the democratic prime minister of a democratic nation was deposed. The Iranians call it the original sin. And that's what is the cause of the current bitterness.
I mean, they have a lot longer memory than we do. They also recall when Reagan ordered to shoot down what turned out to be a commercial jet with like 173 Iranian souls on it. And that happened as well. But yeah, I mean, the CIA, I'm sure you're familiar with Stephen Kinzer and his book Overthrow and the brothers. Do you part ways with him on any of the conclusion that he draws?
No, I've read Stephen Kinzer, and in fact, what I have to say about the CIA will sound very familiar to readers of Stephen Kinzer.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, I could talk to you forever, and I would love to do a part 2 when I am finished with the book, because we've barely touched on it. It's super important, I think, for Americans to read. But why don't you make that sell to an American audience? Because I think that this is a lot of the education that we don't get in America. And if we got it, we forget it. But a lot of it, many of us have lived through now. And that's why I think that being reminded of it and having a book, I think, written the way yours is, covered the way yours is, and looking to the future the way yours does is great. So that's my sale. But what would you tell to the American public as to why Americans should buy a book called America in Retreat, sir?
Look, I'm a friend of America, but what I'm trying to say is America will sort of remain strong if it scales back its unilateralism, if it scales back its hypocrisy, if it scales back its militarism, if it begins to recognize that it is part of a huge world of many different countries, many different polarities and styles of government and of organizing society. There's not one way and not one side, but that was my attempt to explain.
And well said. Michael Pembroke, the book is America in Retreat. What an honor to have you, to join you in discussion about this very important book. Thank you so much. I look forward to doing it again. Part 2, please.
Thank you, Peter.
And thank you, listener. And thank you, even more, subscriber. If you are not a paid subscriber, now is the time to turn the podcast off and sign up. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or just click on the paid subscription link in the show notes. Tell your friends. Give a review. Spend that stimulus money on independent media like this show, coming at you every day from the shed. Thank you very much for your support. I hope to see you Thursday night at our hangout, anytime on the Discord platform where you are never alone. If you're a stand-up subscriber, thank you very much, folks, for listening. And I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up Daily. Take it away, John Carroll.
For your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down, boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. The place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.
Hello, show enders. Here now, one of my favorite funny viral videos from news anchor Isaiah Carey.
What really happened on that Thursday here at Augusta High School that led to Chris Wood's death? The fuck is that? Yes. I'm dying in this fucking country-ass, fucked-up town. Shit flying in my mouth. The fuck? I can't see pollen. Let's get the fuck out of this country, motherfucker. I can't even see me.
Okay. I'll talk to you tomorrow, everybody.